Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into a profound structural mystery about modern governments. Honestly, it's a topic that's going to fundamentally shift how you view political and economic stagnation in the 21st century. So, I want you to think about this destabilizing question to kick off our analysis today. What actually happens when a system knows exactly what's wrong, but just repeatedly chooses not to fix it? Look, when we see prolonged crises, like unaffordable housing or entirely stagnant wages, it is incredibly tempting to just point the finger at the sheer incompetence of whichever politicians happen to be in power at the time. But what if that completely misses the mark? What if the failure to correct a known problem isn't glitch at all, but is actually a feature of the system itself? We are building directly on the first article of his series on functional underdevelopment today. Professor António Francisco really demands that we stop blaming sheer incompetence for national decline. We're looking at his second article, which is brilliantly titled, "It's Not Failure, It's Incentives." And this analysis provides a powerful lens that completely alters how we understand economic stagnation. Let's start with the British paradox. We're examining a nation that produces absolute mountains of brilliant expert reports, yet completely flatlines when it actually comes to execution. The UK actually possesses an extraordinary capacity for diagnostic self-awareness. I mean, they produce more white papers and expert commissions per capita than almost any other advanced economy out there. The empirical landscape of its own decline is utterly transparent to them. And this illustrates the core issue perfectly. It's a mechanical problem. It's like you have this knowledge gear that is spinning perfectly, but it is completely decoupled from the actual correction gear. The real crisis isn't some epistemic failure or a lack of competent analysts. It's a structural reality. The nation doesn't stumble in the dark, you see? It stumbles with perfectly clear vision. To prove this isn't just abstract theory, let's look at the 2004 Barker Review. This was a rigorous, widely read diagnosis that proved mathematically that the UK needed 250,000 new homes annually just to stabilize prices. And the incredible part? Everyone read it. The press, academia, all the political parties, they all recognized the diagnosis as absolutely correct. The blueprint was handed right to them. But then, look at what happened. Over the next 22 years, across 5 different prime ministers, the system predictably looped through failed rhetorical promises without ever actually altering the structural constraint on housing supply. The targets just kept moving up. Eventually, they were promising 300,000 homes a year. Yet by 2023, only 212,000 were delivered. As a result, housing prices in London exploded by roughly 180% since 2004. That has priced an entire generation, maybe even you, completely out of the market. So here is the absolutely crucial point we have to accept. This repeated outcome, it's not a failure of governance. It is an active, structural choice. Common language would say the system failed to build houses, but that framing is dangerously misleading. To call this a failure is to misunderstand the entire political economy at play. Because if you judge the system by its unstated function, which is compounding the wealth of those who already held property back in 2004, well, it's actually been a spectacular economic triumph. The system fulfilled a very specific function, preserving and aggressively growing the value of existing housing assets. For those homeowners, a housing crisis isn't a problem to be solved, it's a highly lucrative condition to be protected. Which brings us to the hidden architecture of incentives, governed by an economic concept known as Manskor-Olson logic of collective action. This logic completely moves us away from conspiracy theories and shows us the cold, hard math of political mobilization. Here is exactly how this builds such a stable equilibrium. Concentrated benefits generate really powerful political mobilization to block reform, while diffuse costs lead only to diffuse, totally ineffective frustration. The benefits of not reforming, like your property values constantly rising, are highly concentrated among small, organized groups. But the costs, like sky-high rents and reduced economic mobility, those are spread out across millions of people. Now consider the sheer mathematical asymmetry at play here. The highly motivated local homeowner, who is protecting a massive asset, easily outmobilizes the disorganized young renter. Just imagine 10,000 incumbent homeowners vigorously defending an individual asset appreciation of $100,000. They are going to show up to every single local planning meeting. Conversely, 1 million young citizens really struggle to politically organize around the very uncertain prospect of maybe saving $300 a month on rent. So the system naturally functions as a filter. It consistently prioritizes that localized opposition over any diffuse collective benefits.
The pain of the housing crisis, simply because it's diluted across a vast majority, completely loses its political force. Meanwhile, the localized veto power of the incumbents remains absolute.
Because of this localized veto power, major government interventions like Help to Buy are just totally neutralized. They merely inflate prices and enrich existing owners without ever expanding the physical supply of houses. The system just absorbs these reform initiatives and twists them to serve the rent capture architecture. It's essentially an illusion of action that only deepens the original problem. And we see the exact same blocking mechanism paralyze efforts to shift productive capital away from wealthy centers like London out to other regions. It leaves us with only symbolic initiatives. Every government promises to level up the country, right? But genuinely redirecting capital means taking it from someone politically potent. So, substantive moves are predictably blocked, and the structural asymmetry of the entire national economy remains firmly in place. Which leads us to a pretty fascinating question. Is this political immunity to correction strictly a British phenomenon, or are we actually looking at a much broader international equilibrium across modern democracies? Turns out, the mechanism simply dresses in different institutional clothing. In France, local opposition ruthlessly slows down supply. Their planning frameworks explicitly prioritize local stability over necessary adjustments. Meanwhile, in Germany, you have this rigid decentralization that fragments decision-making. It allows structural issues to simply accumulate rather than resolve, entirely because of a lack of unified national coordination. Moving south, in Italy and Spain, promised reforms are often rapidly reversed the second those concentrated costs mobilize. And then in Portugal, the state actively cultivates continuous real estate appreciation at the cost of profound urban exclusion. In Portugal specifically, correcting this is politically paralyzed because it would require halting one of their economy's few reliable engines of continuous value creation. Again, the costs are diffuse, but the benefits remain highly concentrated. Okay, so if we know exactly how the trap works, what would actually be required to break this cycle of non-reform? If the system is stuck in this perfectly stable, self-preserving loop, what is the actual price of genuine correction? Well, it would require 3 technically feasible but politically toxic moves. 1, legislating away local veto power. 2, forcibly redirecting capital. And 3, deliberately orchestrating the planned devaluation of existing concentrated assets. Yes, you heard that right. Politically accepting that some concentrated assets must purposely lose value to enable wider productive redistribution. And because any politician proposing those specific steps would immediately lose the very next election, the completely rational choice for them is inaction. The system has literally learned how to survive without correcting its own dysfunctions. The most unsettling realization here isn't that the system fails to correct its problems, it's that self-correction has become structurally impossible to achieve without fundamentally harming heavily protected interests. I'll leave you with this final, deeply unsettling thought from Professor Francisco's analysis today. It leaves us asking, how much longer can our societies afford to protect the unworkable? When a system already has the perfect diagnosis, the only question that matters is what it deliberately chooses to preserve. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this completely changes how you look at the architecture of inaction all around us.